Thank you to Khalif for allowing me to be here. And so let me tell you what I know. I know you can't change what you tolerate. And I know that silence is agreement. And so last year in February, there was something that compelled me to sit and write this book, and it was the Christopher Dorner incident. And many of you may have heard of it. Young man who was fired by LAPD, felt the department had done him a disservice, and was really just trying to clear his name and let people know that the department has a very public face, but then there's a private department that only those of us within that department really truly know. And so while I was watching this thing unfold on the news, I knew that it would end the way that it ended, and I thought that that story, his story, the message that he was trying to get out would end there. And so I didn't want that to happen for two reasons. One is because I knew everything that he said was true, because everything that he had described happened to him happened to me, but it happened to me 15 years earlier. And so I sat down and I wrote this book, and I did it in 8 days. And I was able to do it in 8 days because it's my life, and because it was a very cathartic process for me. And as I started reliving and rethinking and just writing down chronologically everything that I had been through, there were times when I was angered, and there was times when I was happy, thinking about my times on the department. But I wanted to do it in a way where the department could not discredit me as they had done with Christopher Dorner in the media. And they couldn't say that I was a disgruntled employee, because I spent 20 years on the department and I'm honorably retired. So I wanted to share a little bit about my experience between 1980 and 2000 as an African American female coming on predominantly white LAPD. It was very difficult. I came on at a time when the department was under a consent decree to hire more women and minorities, so they really didn't want anybody that looked like me there. And my problems were pretty much immediate because I didn't fit the mold. I didn't fit what their idea of an LAPD officer looked like, sounded like, walked like, smelled like. I went against the grain almost in every category. And that was okay with me because it was more important for me to be me. And so one of the things that I think allowed me to survive is that I never bled blue. It was just a job. I was a single mom at that point with a son and a ton of debt. And I needed a good paying job and one with benefits. And my problems were almost immediate on the department because my partners didn't want me there and they didn't want to work with me. And I would spend 8 hours a day in a car with someone who didn't even speak to me. Disparaging things were said about me. I had no support from my supervisors. And so this went on ad infinitum. But what I knew was that I was determined to get through that 20 years because I knew at the end of that 20 years I was going to get a pension. And so I was not going to be deterred. Now that's not to say that all of my time was bad time, because I had some great partners and I worked some great assignments and I had some really good experiences. And I like to think that I made a difference with the people that I encountered because I treated people with respect and dignity. I'm a mother of 4 sons, and I treated people the way that I would want you to treat my son if you encountered him. And so I never had a problem when I arrested someone because I took them to jail, but I took them with their dignity. Right. And so when I think about my book and I think about the relevance, this type of story will always be timely because police officers come from society and they do things that are not always appropriate. And I don't know if you've been following what's been going on in the news lately, but right now in the Los Angeles Police Department we have a controversy that's brewing. There was a white police officer back in 1997 who killed a black police officer, both on LAPD at the time. One was on duty, one was off duty. And recently this white officer was making some very disparaging remarks against the black officer at a training day. And it's been reported on the news. He was recorded surreptitiously saying he had no regrets about killing this black officer. And he said that if he had his way, he would have killed a whole truckload of them. And so a mutual friend of mine made this audio tape available, put it on the internet, and so now it's a big deal because the police chief is looking for a second term. And so now this controversy has come out, and because everybody understands that LAPD never addressed that situation back in 1997, and they really had no intention of addressing it when he made these disparaging remarks in November of 2013. But for Channel 4 making an issue of it last week, now the department is saying, well, we have to do something, and they're making moves like they're going to do something, but I'm not really sure what that outcome is going to be. And so really what the takeaway is when you read my book is to understand that what I went through is not unique to LAPD. It's not unique to law enforcement. I'm sure all of you've worked on jobs where you felt like you were just one person going against a machine. Maybe you hadn't been treated fairly. You tried all the employee grievance procedures that were available to you and still didn't get the outcome that you wanted. And so I think, because I didn't know Christopher Dorner and understand I don't condone what he did, but I know LAPD, and I know that that process will grind you down. And I know that they have deep pockets and they have the financial wherewithal and the resources to drag out a protracted trial or administrative hearing. And if you've been relieved of duty without pay, most of us are just a paycheck away from disaster. So we really can't stand that kind of pressure. And if you think that they're not being honest in their judgment and assessment of you, then that compounds the situation. And that's kind of how I found myself. I found myself facing an administrative board of rights very similar to the one that Christopher Dorner sat before. But I had been ordered to a board of rights with 18 years on the department. And my dilemma was this. If I was found guilty of giving false and misleading statements, which is what they accused me of doing with 18 years on the department, I would have just lost my entire pension. Because I came on at a time when if you don't make it to 20 years, you just get to go. You don't get the money that you put in, you just get to go. And they had sent me to an administrative board of rights for something that just was so outrageous. I thought that if I could bring attention to it at the time, maybe the department would treat me better, fairer. But they didn't. They didn't allow me to bring attention to it. And so they were able to do this to me under a vacuum. Thankfully, I had a commanding officer who was willing to step forward, unlike many, and tell the department that they had really reached too far into my personal situation. And because of him and him alone, the department did find me guilty, but they didn't terminate me. They gave me a 5-day suspension. And I talk about these experiences in my book. And I talk about how I was able to hold on and make it to that 20-year mark. I talk about real life circumstances. I talk about things that the department can't say I'm making up, because in some instances I name the parties involved, and in other instances, if you just Google the circumstance, you'll see exactly who I'm talking about. And there's one person that I talk about, and I always like to mention him because I refer to him as Christopher Dorner before Christopher Dorner. And he was one of my supervisors when I was working South Bureau Crash, which was our gang detail. And his name was Fred Nichols. Fred Nichols was a guy who bled blue, and he bought into the LAPD system. He had some very coveted and high-profile positions. He was ordered to testify at the Rodney King trial, and he testified truthfully that those white officers used excessive force, because we knew that they did. We saw it on video. When he testified truthfully, the department did what he did not expect, which was turn their back on him. They took him out of his coveted position. They put him in a place that he could not believe that they would put him, because after all, he had been the department spokesman. He was the department expert on use of force. But when the department turned on him in the way that they did, for truthfully telling that this was excessive force, this is not what we teach our officers to do, he was so overwhelmed. Much like Christopher Dorner probably was, much like I was when I sat before that board of rights. He was so overwhelmed and so outdone and could not believe it, because he had given the department 16 years and he had done everything the department had asked him to do. And unlike Christopher Dorner, he didn't create a manifesto. He didn't go on a killing spree. What Fred Nichols did is he checked himself into a hotel, he put a shotgun to his head, and he blew it off. So I want people to understand that Fred Nichols didn't wake up that morning thinking about committing suicide. I'm sure Christopher Dorner did not want to do what he did. Certainly when I was going through my own trials and tribulations with the department, and I talk about it in the book, there were times when I thought about some really wicked things. Because I knew that if I lost my job, having come on the department at the age of 22 with a high school education only, where would I go? What would I do? This was my life. And so there were times when I was going back and forth to that board hearing, because it was on the 3rd level of the Bradbury building, that I had to will myself to walk very close along the walls like a rat would run a wall, because I thought if I got too close to that edge, I might just jump. Because in my mind, what I had convinced myself of is if this board finds me guilty with 18 years on this department, and I've got 4 sons, and now I'm going through a divorce, my kids are not going to have anything. But if I throw myself over this ledge, at least they'll have the insurance money that I've been paying into on my life insurance policy. And I'm not happy to say that. I'm a little embarrassed to say it, as a matter of fact, but I know that I'm not the only person that has gotten to a point where you felt like you would do something that's really not you. Because the department didn't even want us to go to his uniform in uniform. I mean, go to his funeral in uniform, which is what, you know, when you see it on TV, you see what they do. And so the department didn't want us to go in uniform. And so we were kind of raising a little Cain about that because we wanted to honor him. This was a black man. And those of us that looked like him felt some kind of way about it. And so we wanted to go in uniform. And eventually they allowed us to go in uniform, but they didn't have the whole thing that they would do if someone had, right, they didn't have all of that. Right, yeah, nobody came from near and far, you know what I mean, and that was okay, but we wanted to honor him in the way that, you know, we wanted to honor him, which was to go Class A, because that's what we do, we go Class A, hat and tie and the whole regalia is what I call it. And so we were able to do that, but by and large, you know, the department, like I said, the department has 2 faces, and with this thing going on right now, with this name, Frank Liga is the white officer, detective, that killed the black officer Kevin Gaines. If you watch what's going on in the news right now, I don't know how this thing is gonna wind up, because what just happened last night is that someone, I think now officers are starting to feel a little more empowered in terms of speaking, because understand, when you talk about the Los Angeles Police Department, that's career suicide. And so you don't have officers on the department that will speak. You don't have officers that are high ranking that will speak. I say that you will not find anyone above the rank of captain who will speak truthfully about what that department does and what really goes on. And I'm talking about black folks. You got black folks on the department, they may not do you any harm, but they certainly will not help you. And so, but you know, this goes on not only in law enforcement, this goes on in all types of jobs where you have people who just, you know, they get up and they won't do anything to help you for fear of somebody saying that they were a little too nice, you know, when other ethnicities have no problem taking care of their own and helping one another. You know, I don't know what that is about us that we are so worried about what somebody might think.
I did hear last night where they took some kind of measure. I don't want to say suspended, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Well, here's what a lot of people don't understand.
Pressure.
Right. Now know this. The department knew about his comments back in November when he made them. And the department did nothing. They did nothing. They did nothing until Patrick Healy did a newscast report last week. So what the department does is they have code talk. That's what I call it, code talk. Because if you're not in that institution, you don't understand. For instance, there was a young man named Sean Hillman a few months ago who was out here in Norco. He was in a bar, and there was a black man that was dancing with his wife, and he didn't like it. And I don't know why this black man was in this bar to begin with, but he was in there in Norco. And so he was dancing with his wife. The officer was drunk in public. He started brandishing his firearm, which is a crime. He called him a black monkey, and I don't know what else he called him. Riverside sheriffs responded. They recorded all of this. Eventually, LAPD found out about it. LAPD initiated an internal affairs investigation, and they questioned him about it, and he denied that he said those things and did those things, which is false and misleading statements, which is the same thing that Christopher Dorner was fired for, which is the same thing that they were trying to fire me for. Right. This young man, the chief decided, I'm not going to fire him because the board recommended termination, but the chief decided that he wasn't going to fire him, that what he was going to do was to give him a 65-day suspension. And the reason that he gave him the 65-day suspension is because he said this was serious misconduct, and that he took it very serious that this officer was behaving this way, and this was a heavy fine. Well, that's code talk, because a 65-day suspension is a gift. He still has his job. He still gets to work on his pension. He can't work patrol. He can't work the field anymore because he's been proven a liar, unlike Christopher Dorner, whose Board of Rights deemed him a liar. And deemed, if you look it up, means that's what I think, that's what I feel. That's not what I know. That's not what I prove. But they deemed him a liar. This guy is the nephew of a high-ranking LAPD official. And so that's why the chief of police gifted him with a 65-day suspension. But when he says to the public and to the press that this is a serious misconduct, that's why he was given 65 days without pay, you might think, okay, well, that sounds reasonable. But if you don't know, and if you aren't willing to call him on it and challenge him and ask him those follow-up questions and really put him to the fire, then he gets away with that. And so there's code talk going on right now with this Frank Liga thing, because the department knew about this, and they knew about it in November, and they didn't do anything. And so what they did is they sent him home with pay. Frank Liga has 28 years on the department. Believe and trust when I tell you that he will retire with his pension, which he deserves, before they will be able to adjudicate this thing administratively. And so he will retire. So my hope is that the district attorney will get wind of this and maybe open up an investigation into the circumstances of Kevin Gaines' murder, because that's what it was. It was a murder. At the time, Bernard Parks was the chief of police. Bernard Parks hurried up and paid Kevin Gaines' family $250,000 to make them go away. Now we know, because it was just leaked, that there was a memo, and in this memo, during that recording, Frank Liga said that when the shooting happened, Bernard Parks wanted to reassign him, and he said he was pissed and he didn't want to get reassigned, and he told his captain, if Bernard Parks moves me, I will go to the media and tell them that this was an LAPD sanctioned hit. A few hours later, he got a phone call from his captain saying Bernard Parks has a heart, and so you can stay and you can work here. This has just been uncovered, so I don't know what's going to happen in the next few days, but people are talking about it, and people are funneling documents and records and stuff to the media to let them know how LAPD works. You raised your hand.
Me?
Yes.
When you say they're speaking in codes, is that the entire police department, or is it just the Europeans that work with the police department?
It's the police department, but see, I'm on it. So when I hear something like 65 days is a big suspension, that's a serious penalty. When I hear that, I know that that's code talk.
Now, is it usually us that talk using that same language, or is it usually them, meaning white people? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it has nothing to do with color. Because understand, this is my belief, that the police department will do what it has to do to protect the police department. They will circle the wagons around whomever they need to circle to protect the police department and the city of Los Angeles. And if an officer benefits from that, good for you. But it's really not about you, in my opinion.
The reason why I asked that is because, like you said, Sister Dorner,
Yes.
when she got the
Yes.
code, the gentleman,
Liga. Liga, L-Y-G-A, Liga.
is he black or white?
He's white.
Now, he's been on it for 28 years. If the same thing had happened to a man of color, would he still have had the same benefits as this guy who's 28? Would he have been released, or maybe would he have gotten?
I can't say unequivocally, because what I can tell you is this. I would say no, but I can't say for sure no. But what I will tell you this is sometimes, and you understand, it's not always what you know, it's who you know. And so if you have your cart hooked up to the right horse, then you benefit. Then you benefit. And so, unfortunately, when Bernard Parks was the chief of police, because he looks like you and I, you would think that maybe things would be different. But actually, he was harder and more severe on black officers. And he boasts, I fired 140 officers during my 5-year tenure as a police chief. He's proud to say that. Now, of that 140, I don't know how many of them are black, but I'd bet you it was about 125. You know what I mean?
More than 10%.
And so, so I never, during my time on the department, I never looked to black people on the department with me for anything, because all the love I got came from a white man, James Tatro.
There you go.
Why
There
I
you go.
asked that question
There you
because of a lot of research and studying and reading that I've done. When you mention code talk, I've read a lot of books. Even we as melanated people don't know. They'll say the simplest English word. They're speaking in codes beyond what we know.
Right.
And they've been doing it for years.
Right.
And we'll have a conversation right
Right.
We heard it, but we didn't know they were cold
Right.
talking.
And so I think within each group, in each subgroup, you know, there's a language that gets developed that only certain people understand. And so LAPD is that. I mean, I don't want, it's not a cult,
It's a
but
language in
but
itself.
clearly, you know, we have a language that we use, and that if you're on the outside when we're talking, you don't really know what I'm talking about. But see, I know. And so I will ask you, if given the opportunity, to please explain that to me. Please explain to me how Christopher Dorner could be fired for giving false and misleading statements because a Board of Rights deemed it. And what the Board of Rights said is that when Christopher Dorner reported that his white training officer had kicked a mentally ill man in the head, the department said, "We don't believe you. Here's why. You waited 5 days after that happened to tell us. The people that were in a motel nearby where it happened didn't see it. And we just don't like you. We just don't think you're credible." So when I hear that the people in the hotel, the witnesses that should have said they didn't see it, so then my question as a sergeant of police is, well, does that mean they didn't see it because they were on a day off? Did they not see it because they were in the back of the hotel folding sheets? Or did they not see it because it didn't happen? I don't know. But if you just say to me, the witnesses said they didn't see it, you would not question that. You would say, well, the witnesses said they didn't see it, so it must not have happened.
Like, I understand that's another part of cold talk.
Right.
I understand I'll be back later, but I didn't say how much later I'll be back. I'm
Right.
come back in a week.
Right. And so this is what the department does. And so, like I said, if you don't understand that, then it seems reasonable and they get away with it. But, you know, there's so much going on right now in the news with LAPD. And this is not just LAPD, because I've been looking at things all over the country. You know, there was a young man in, I think it was Bloomfield, New Jersey, about 6 months ago. Marcus Jeter, I think was his name. And what happened with this young man is that he was at his girlfriend's house real quick. Domestic violence, police were called out, no problem, no crime. They let him go. He drives off. The police follow him. They stop him some ways away. And they get into this big confrontation with him. And what happens is that they wind up pulling him out of his car because he's afraid to get out. It's all on video. He's afraid to get out of the car. He's thinking they're going to shoot him because they're surrounding his car with guns drawn. Another officer comes in as this thing is winding down, comes in and just rams into the front of his car, hits the front of his car. The other officers are still yelling to him, "Get out the car, get out the car." They pull him out the car. They arrest him for battery on a police officer. They take him to trial. He's in trial, and somehow his attorney got a hold of a video camera from a second police car. And the second videotape is the one that showed what really happened, because the one that they had produced for court didn't really show what really happened. And once his attorney produced that, the judge stopped the case right there, released this young man, and then indicted the officers. He was facing 5 years in prison, but for that camera. Because people, courts, people give great deference to police officers. And you assume if a police officer says something that is true. You don't question them. You know, used to. You know, but the courts still do. Juries still do. Juries give great deference to police officers. And so if you have an overzealous officer, if you have someone who's willing to manufacture probable cause because they want to ruin your night or ruin your weekend and send you to jail on a Friday and have you stay there all weekend because you don't have the bail money to get out. And when it goes to court on Monday, it's going to be a DA reject because it doesn't really fit the criteria for that particular offense. Okay, you got out, no big deal, I don't care. But guess what? I just took 72 hours out of your life that you cannot get back.
That's right.
And so that happens a lot.
And they will tell you that too.
It happens a lot.
I have one question in mind.
Mm-hmm.
This corruption goes on that you're talking about. And sometimes you hear about internal affairs, but they're going on so rapidly for so long. How come it's not involved at a higher level, like civil or federal court? I mean, they're really like trying to put a cap on and do investigation in there. Like what you're saying, how come a lot of that hasn't, like maybe before you came on the force?
Because one hand washes the other. That's my opinion. They're all in cahoots. And so, you know, right now, I mean, I don't know anything about this DA in Los Angeles, Jackie Lacey. I don't know anything about her, but I know that the DA's office works very closely with the police department. And so I'm hoping that the DA's office will look into this shooting of Kevin Gaines, because it was never an investigation. And so, in my mind, how I see that thing happening back in 1997 is that the police department knew that that was a bad shooting, but they could not say that it was a bad shooting because they would have had to pay that family a lot more than $250,000. So I believe that they blessed it. Chief Parks blessed it and said it's a good shooting. The district attorney at the time, Gil Garcetti, never opened up an investigation. He had opened up an inquiry. And during that, I picture Bernard Parks saying, it's a good shooting, it's in policy, everything is good here, Gil, we got this. And then Gil Garcetti saying, well, then if it's good with you, it's good with me. No need for me to do an investigation. I'm out of here. And so no investigation was ever done. Fast forward to November 2013, when you've got this white boy, Frank Liga, saying, yeah, I killed him. Yeah, I killed him. When Carl Douglas, the attorney with Johnny Cochran's firm, was questioning him during a deposition and asked him, do you have any regrets? He said, no. The only regret I have is that there wasn't more of them in the car because I could have killed a whole truckload of them.
So Liga he said that he told Bernard Parks that it was a hit.
A hit.
So was it truly a hit, or that was just his bluff?
Well, now see, that's what we don't know. But what makes me question that whole thing is that maybe there's some validity to that. I don't know if it was a hit or if it was a matter of the department, because Liga was working narcotics. He was working undercover narcotics on the west side of town. This shooting happened on in South Central, which is nowhere near West LA, the west side of town. So why is this undercover narcotics officer in South Central? Number one.
So it sounds very likely that it could have been a hit. And because why would he feel so boldly to say this to Bernard Parks? I mean, you know.
Or threaten to say it, and threaten to say it to the point where nothing was ever done. Nothing was ever done. And
So
even when they found out about this in November of last year, because someone wrote a memo to the deputy chief, Earl Paysinger, and they told Earl Paysinger everything that I'm telling you now, because this has just been released on social media right now, last night. They told Earl Paysinger, and everybody knew in November, and they did nothing. So they had no intention of doing anything. Everything the department is doing right now is a dog and pony show, in my opinion. The department relieved him of duty with pay. The department assigned him to home with pay. And that is where he will be until he goes down to the Department of Pensions and submits his paperwork, because I promise you, he will not let them fire him. He will retire because he can. Because he can. He has 28 years on the department. Let me ask this lady back here.
I know that you're speaking the truth. I call it good old boys.
Exactly.
I live in Riverside County, and I'm elected. And I will tell you, I am elected to office. I've been elected a long time.
You what?
Elected.
Elected.
Been on the school board since 1985. And it's all about money.
I don't even have to say anymore, because that's where I was going with my
It's all
last
about
statement.
money. I do know the sheriff in Riverside, because I do know very well. He didn't have a prescription. It was his election year. Ran into a tree. Did nothing. Got reelected. And that's how bad it is in Riverside County. So, all that to say, and I'm thinking, wow, because I look at being elected to a school board, the pipeline of prison. I'm looking at the other dynamics more. That's some of the issues that I deal with. And I'm looking at, and I don't know about the politics of LA per se. I know you're a politician.
Right.
Because I've been elected a long time. And I know some of your African Americans, Black Caucus.
That are playing musical chairs.
So, what type of, I look at policies and legislation and, something that will really impact, because if it doesn't come from a legal state of point of view or some type of legal, that's where we won with the NAACP, the Thurgood Marshall. They kept those lawsuits, and they kept, they got to the Supreme Court. What type of legislation or policy, or it's got to be more than that one, do you see that we need to do? Because you've given me, I got invited, you've given me another I don't put it, because I'm on the other side. You know, I'm on the legal side, the side that makes the policy, the side that's the ones that, you know, I'm looking at Camilla Harris. I'm like, okay, these are all the Supreme, or what is it, the Attorney General
Right.
is the United States, right? So the level is they're not going to investigate unless it's a policy. I do know in Riverside County, and I'm gonna stop the question. You know, see what you say. Riverside County investigates themselves. So you put in a complaint, it's like it's like they're investigating themselves. So what good is putting a citizen complaint, which I am, besides, you know, going to the meeting or what good is that? And I'm quite sure LAPD is probably the same thing. You put in a complaint, it's probably done internally. And then you know, that's the process. But what do you see that the pressure as far as political that we can do as a people, because I know some of us is the worst enemy.
Right.
And I believe me, I understand that, you know, because we trying to, I don't want to say fit in, that's a good word.
Chief Beck does not get a second term. He will be replaced with an LAPD insider who grew up on that department, who thinks the same way, who acts the same way, who has been acquiescing the foolishness that's going on right now. And so there really will be no difference. And so I feel that same sense of frustration. But what I think has to happen is that there needs to be a light on the situation so that they can't hide, because but for someone releasing that audio tape last weekend on Facebook, we wouldn't be talking about Frank Liga today.
True.
And so I just think that as the word gets out and more people talk about it, at some point somebody's going to have to do something. And so this is what I tell people when they talk about making complaints on police officers for just errant misconduct. You know, they say, I'll go to the station and I'll fill out a form. And I say, don't waste your time. Here's what you do. You write a letter. You create a paper trail. You write a letter. You write a letter to the chief of police. You write a letter to the police commission. You write a letter to the captain, the commanding officer of that patrolman's division. You write a letter to the commanding officer of internal affairs. 5 or 6 people get this letter. They're going to start calling each other and they're going to say, I got this letter, what's going on? One person might be able to make it go away, but 6 people are not going to be able to shove something under the rug. And so I feel the same way about this particular situation. And I feel the same way about any injustice, is that if you make it known and you know, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? And so you make it known and you talk about it here, there, and everywhere. And at some point, somebody's going to have to say, sheesh. You know, they're going to have to cry uncle, and they're going to have to do something. Now, I don't trust LAPD to do the right thing here, because LAPD had an opportunity. They had since November of 2013 to do the right thing, and they didn't. So it's going to have to be an outside entity. I don't even know if the LADA's office is the right one to go to, because they work closely with the police department. When you make an arrest in LA and you want criminal consideration, you go to the DA's office. And so they're all very closely connected. So it's going to have to be somebody bigger and somebody further away from the department to really get something done.
So let me ask you, so do you think, because I'm concerned about NAACP, our so-called advocacy organizations that we have, do you think, and I'm thinking the ACLU, I'm thinking, you know, okay, what entity, do you think something needs to be created on the outside? Because that was the purpose of the NAACP years ago, was those lawsuits that were going to take the buses in to the community, and they did the lawsuits, and that kept the light on the situation, because this is not just LA.
Right.
I'm in Riverside County. I'm quite sure San Bernardino, the United States. I'm quite sure this
Sheriff's Department.
sheriff, because what I know, because I travel all over the United States. So you think maybe it needs to be another outside interest group?
You know, personally, I don't know what the benefit would be in creating another group if that group is going to do the same thing. If we've got something in place, then what we need to do is fix that. Because you know, what I tell my young sons, who are all over the age of 18, and you know, I worry them to death. You can ask one of them, because he's back there. When it's time to vote, I worry them to death. Everybody's got mail-in ballots, and I'm sitting down and we going over stuff. And what I say is, you know, there's one reason and one reason only why people really should vote, and that's because of Supreme Court appointments, because the president makes them. And so if you have a president in there who is stacking up the Supreme Court in a way that doesn't benefit us, will never benefit us, you can understand just very simply why it's so important. Because people say my vote doesn't count, you know, why would I go vote for this and that and this and that? But if you think about the power, a lifetime appointment on a Supreme Court, that alone should get you to go vote. And so the same thing with these different entities and organizations. If you're not going to put people in there, if you're not going to go out and vote, elect, whatever that process is, and put people in that position, then what good is the NAACP? If you got people on the NAACP that really are more interested in Donald Sterling and his foolishness than they are in the people that they supposedly represent, you create another group and you stack it with like-minded people that really don't have a vested interest. So I think it would be, for me personally, I just think it would make more sense to get people in there that are really going to be advocates. Yeah, that's what I think.
Were there any more women coming into the workforce right now?
On the department?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I know there's not a lot of black people coming into LAPD. LAPD right now is predominantly Hispanic. And unfortunately, you know, when I was on the department between 1980 and 2000, there were several blacks in positions, in prominent positions, who really maybe could have made a difference if they were willing to help you. You know, I didn't ask anybody for anything. I made it to the rank of sergeant, not because somebody made me a sergeant. I made it to the rank of sergeant because I was deserving, because I was a good patrol officer, and I took the test and I passed. And I had a white man who believed in me, who all along the way said, you should take this next promotional test. And when you pass that test, come see me and come work for me. And conversely, I had black supervisors, command staff officers, even when I was going through my internal affairs, my board of rights. And I went, because they were accused, I was in a domestic violence situation. I was married to a police officer. And what happened was every time that I had called the police on him, because we all have guns, they said that that was unnecessary. And they were able to find out the police had been to my house 6 times. So they charged me with 6 counts of misconduct. And they said every time that the police came, I unnecessarily caused the response of an outside agency. So when I went before my board of rights, I knew, because I had a deputy chief who was sitting as the chairman of my board, I knew I needed a high-ranking official to come in and say, I'm a good officer, I've been a good sergeant, this is the kind of work that I've been involved in on the department. I've never been in any trouble. This stuff happened on the outside of the department. And oh, by the way, I thought I was doing the right thing by calling and asking for help because everybody has guns. And I don't want to get into it with this man. So when I went to a black commander and said, could you come and speak as a character witness for me? He said, forget you know me. And so that's kind of how they work on the department.
Was he your ex-spouse's friend?
No, he was just a black man on the department who wouldn't take a stand. Who just wouldn't take a stand.
Police officer, I've never been one, but I've been in her exact same shoe. And you don't continue to call the police. I'm not going to tell you how I finally resolved it. I really resolved it. But yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And so when you have this kind of a dynamic, when you have blacks on the department who were in a position to really help other blacks, be a mentor, and they won't help you, well, now those people have come and gone. They've retired. If I was still on LAPD, I'd have 34 years. So my contemporaries are on their way out the door. And there's just not very many black men and women within that system to come through the pipeline to get in a position of authority to really make a difference. I'm told that there's about 700 men and about 200 women on the department, and that's at varying ranks. So when you got a 12,000, 10,000 member department, there's not a whole lot. I'm just say one more thing and then I'll let you know. So I had a female friend of mine recently who retired. She was captain. She was a captain. She had 32 years on the department, and she retired last year. So this is that double face that the LAPD has. So she retired last year, 32 years on the department. Do you know that the chief of police did not even come to her retirement? Did not even come. Didn't send anybody. 32 years. And during those 32 years that this black woman was on the department, and she was one of 3 black women who made it to the rank of captain. She was one of 3. And during that time, she was diagnosed with and survived breast cancer. And he did not even come because there were no cameras rolling. And so it wasn't a big deal. Where in corporate America could you spend 32 years and not have your CEO come and at least say thank you? At least say thank you. And she's one of 3 black women on a 12,000 member department that made it to the rank of captain, and you wouldn't even come and honor her service? Are you kidding me? But she couldn't speak on it, because if she speaks on it, then it looks like she's disgruntled. It looks like something wrong with her. She's an angry black woman. So I was all over social media with that, and I said, shame on you, Chief Beck. Shame on you.
Good for you.
Shame on you. 32 years and you don't come? I recently attended a meeting last week, something called Ceasefire in Los Angeles. I don't live in LA, but I went to the meeting because the police chief was supposed to be there. He didn't show up. They were talking about the homicide rate right now in South Central LA. Since June 1st, there have been 16 homicides in LA since June 1st. The police chief didn't come because he didn't want to answer any questions about this whole Frank Liga thing. So he didn't come. He sent his underlings. And they stayed in the room long enough to make sure nobody was going to say much about him not being there, because one of them stood up and very loudly made his presence known and made it probably feel uncomfortable for anybody that would have said anything about the police chief not being there. Once they were satisfied that nothing was going to be said, they left. They didn't even have the common courtesy to stay for an hour and sit on 79th and Western in his church and listen to the concerns and complaints that the community had about the rash of homicides that are going on. But this man wants a second term. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that. Had he been there, they would not have left, but he wasn't there. So they left, they went outside, and they talked amongst themselves. And when I finally left, I saw them in the parking lot, and they know who I am. And one of them asked me, he says, oh, hey, how you doing? You know, what are you doing now in retirement? And I said, I'm stirring the pot. That's what I do.
Let me ask you a question. Don't you feel that the police chiefs that we've heard about, don't you feel that they are really just figureheads?
No, not in LA. Our police chief, absolutely, he runs that department. And I had a conversation with someone very recently.
Okay, let me back up. I shouldn't say all. I was going back to Parks.
Parks was not a figurehead. Parks ran that department. Absolutely, Parks ran that department. Parks did exactly what he wanted to do. And when Parks came in, he was so angry with Willie Williams, because I believe they brought Willie Williams in. He was brought in to fail. He was an outsider.
That's right.
He could not, he did not know what went on. And he didn't have a support system. So he came, they brought him in to fail. But what happened is that when Willie Williams came in, because Bernard grew up in that system, there was a clash. And so there was a split within the department. And so we had one camp that was with Willie Williams, and we had one camp that was with Bernard Parks. Well, when Reardon didn't give Willie a second term, and Bernard took over, on the first day there was a bloodletting, because
But didn't Reardon, wasn't he the one that suggested Parks?
he didn't like. I think he didn't like Willie Williams,
No,
and so
he
he
didn't, but
and
he-
so
he's
he yeah,
the one that kinda
because
sort of
Parks
said-
was the likely, you know, he was the one to get the nod. He was the one to get the nod. Just like if Beck does not get this position, there's 1 or 2 people whose parents or relatives some kind of way were high-ranking LAPD officials. Downing is one, and Michael Moore. Yeah, I think his name is Michael Moore, but his last name is Moore. So Downing and Moore, those are the 2 that will be the likely succeeders.
And you don't believe that they are motivated from within as to how they are to run certain things?
I think they're motivated by that system. I think they're motivated by the systemic culture of that department. And so they're going to do everything that we've always done. It's going to be status quo. It'll just be a different name.
That's
And as
what I'm
long
talking about.
as
But
long
they
as the
decide which one of them they're going to allow to go in there.
well, the police commission ultimately decides, I think, along with the mayor. And so they will do their level best. I think this police commission will do their level best to put somebody in that position that's going to do the right thing. But it would almost have to be an outsider, because when Bratton came in, he kind of made a difference.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he kind of made a difference. And so I think in order for there to be some real change on the department right now, with all this going on with this Liga thing and Sean Hillman and the Christopher Dorner, although that thing is come and gone, because, you know, when they did that second look at it, I understood that whatever the finding would be very similar to the first finding, because the department is not going to admit wrongdoing. Because if they admit wrongdoing, then they would be paying Mrs. Dorner right now for killing her son in that cabin. So it almost needs to be someone from the outside to come in. But it has to be someone with a different mindset, because if you come from another police department that has that same kind of mentality, because this is not unique to LAPD. It's not unique to LAPD. So if you get a police chief from some other place and you put him in LAPD, it's just more of the same but with a different flavor. So I think the police commission is in a position, this commission that Garcetti appointed, because I think he wants a different direction. And so it's incumbent upon them to put somebody in that position on LAPD that will really finally, for the first time, do the right thing.
They have to have someone awfully strong to come in and change the system as it is. Can we go back to the 60s in Chicago when they brought in the guy from SC to go in and change the system of the Chicago Police Department? I forget what his name is. But what he did was he went in there and for 4 years he did everything that he possibly could to make an attempt to try to stop some of the graft and some of the killings and all of the things that were going on in Chicago. But there were so many that were already getting paid off, so many that had already been living there. They said, O.W. Wilson was his name. They said, we allow him to come in here and change what we have going now. My own husband went in and arrested a man, unbeknownst to him at 21, who this guy is. He was one of the biggest policy home runners in Chicago. He was told the next day that if he brought another one in, he could consider his career over. Period. You don't do this. So the system stays the same.
Well, I believe it's going to take some time for sure,
Yeah.
but I'm hopeful that they'll get someone who has a desire and an interest to do that, because right now this guy doesn't, and so I'm not encouraged by him.
Correct on that.
The way I know the business is done, it's done on the golf course. I call, I do business like that sometimes myself. I call the meeting before the meeting, the meeting after the meeting. That's what I call it. Okay, the meeting or the golf course.
Well,
or
I'm really interested in
and the reason why I say money is I'm just, I don't know about LAPD, I do know about the politics of California, but I do know that when you talk about the higher ups, they get paid a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's not just, like you said, the city council, it's the county supervisors, it's really entrenched, it's whoever, the vendors, whoever, it's like layered when you certain issues, so you don't never know who, I call it backdoor deals.
Right.
That's right.
You never know who's getting the backdoor deals.
That's
So that's why I actually, knowing what I know and the difference that I can make, and I'm glad I got invited, because I think we all have to work together and make a decision consciously. The decision is people.
And so that's kind of what motivated me to write my book, was to let people know, because people know that this goes on, or they think that it goes on. When we talk about racial profiling, we know what that is, but unless and until you have somebody who says, yeah, from the inside, that it goes on, and that I've been a witness to it, I've been a participant, observer,
Exactly.
validate that thing that we know.
Yeah.
Until we do that, I think it's going to be status quo. And so that's what brought me here, and I appreciate you guys coming and listening, and I hope that you will tell all your friends about my book, and and then
I can't wait to get on Twitter tonight. I've been talking about the LAPD for the past month and a half.
Go ahead, you wanted to say something?
Since you had rise in the system of sergeant,
Yes.
have you thought about progressing beyond that, or were you just to the point of like, I'm burned out?
Well, you know what? I was a sergeant with 18 years on when they sent me through what they sent me through.
Yeah.
And so at that point, all I needed to do was just hold on for 2 more years.
Right.
I just needed to hold on.
right.
And I already had made up my mind really when I came on at such an early age that if I did 20 years, because statistics show the longer you stay in that line of profession, the less likely you are to live on the other end. And so I didn't want to take a bunch of years off my life. So I figured I came on at 22, I'll do 20 years, I'll be 42, and I'll retire, and I'll do whatever, or I'll do nothing.
Yeah.
And so that was my mindset. But then when I got to year 18 and they did what they did, I knew that I was good with LAPD, and all I needed to do was hold on till I got to 20 so I could get out of there. So I had no interest in doing anything other, yeah,
Because
than
there would
holding
be
on.
somebody at every stop to try to put a stop to what you were trying to do to elevate.
Well, I wasn't interested in elevating. I just need to hold on.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just needed to hold on. So that was how
Absolutely.
that happened.
Well, we want to thank everybody for coming.
Oh,
It
Thank
was
you,
yes.
Khalif. I
great.
so
Yes.
appreciate
Thank
you.
And it was very, very informative.
Yes.
Yay.
I did want to say one thing, and that is that we're here to create a economic and political base to where we don't have to rely or put so much pressure on those people in a institution like any police department to have to step forward. Well, I should say we want them to be able to be comfortable to step forward. They have no backup. It's like their career is done also, and some of us are not willing to step up anyway. So what we need to do is get our homework done by creating systems of protection, and this is one of them. If we keep coming together and create our educational systems, our people are